It was the blade that decided fates, a machine of cold efficiency designed to sever not just heads, but the very fabric of an era. The guillotine was more than an execution device. It was a symbol of revolution, a force of terror, and the great equalizer of the damned. From the blood-stained squares of Paris to its final cut in 1977. Its legacy is carved in history with ruthless precision. But was it justice or merely the most infamous slaughter ever mechanized? The guillotine's grim birth, revolutionizing death in 18th century France, before the guillotine execution methods in France were gruesome and varied. Nobles were granted the relative mercy of beheading by sword, while commoners faced slow, agonizing deaths, hanging, burning, or even the breaking wheel. But amid the radical ideals of the French Revolution, one man sought to change that: Dr. Joseph Ignace. Guillotine, a physician and politician, argued for an egalitarian form of execution, one that would eliminate suffering and apply the same punishment to all regardless of social rank. Now with my machine I cut off your head in the twinkling of an eye and you feel nothing, he claimed, but Guillotine did not design the device that would bear his name. That task fell to Dr. Antoine Louis, a prominent surgeon who refined the mechanics of beheading, drawing inspiration from earlier decapitation devices in Scotland and Italy. Louis perfected a slanted blade that would slice cleanly through the neck. Parisian craftsmen then brought the machine to life, and in 1792 the guillotine was ready for use. Its first victim was Nicolas Jacques Pelletier, a common criminal convicted of robbery and assault. On April 25, 1792, he was led to the scaffold. In the Place de Grève, surrounded by a curious and expectant crowd, as the blade fell, spectators were eerily silent, shocked, perhaps by the machine's cold efficiency, but their fascination soon turned to disappointment. They had expected a more dramatic spectacle, and some even grumbled that the guillotine robbed executions of their entertainment value. Little did they know this device would soon claim far more famous heads. Public spectacles of death, the guillotine as morbid entertainment. The guillotine was not just an execution device, it became a public obsession. In the heart of revolutionary Paris, Place de la Révolution, the blood-soaked square that had once honored the monarchy became the stage for death. Here thousands of heads rolled, including those of King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, their severed faces held aloft to the roar of an approving crowd. Executions became daily performances, drawing spectators from all walks of life. At the center of this macabre theater stood the Sanson family, a dynasty of executioners. Charles Henry Sanson, the most infamous of them, personally carried out over 3,000 executions. Dressed in a red vest, he ascended the scaffold with methodical precision, ensuring that justice or vengeance was delivered without flaw. His work became so routine that he once remarked, "I am the last face they see before eternity." Among the spectators, a peculiar group emerged, the tricoteuses, or knitting women. They took front row seats at executions, rhythmically working their needles as heads fell into the basket. These women, immortalized in literature, became a chilling symbol of how normalized public death had become. The guillotine, initially intended as an instrument of equality, had transformed into a grim form of mass entertainment where life and death played out before an eager, unflinching audience. As the blood of the aristocracy spilled in the streets, the guillotine became the beating heart of the revolution, its cold steel blade falling with frightening regularity. The people who once cheered for the fall of the monarchy began to see the same blade turn on them and their once admired leaders. The weapon that was designed for equality became a tool of terror and control, with heads of not only kings, but also the people who had once been seen as revolutionaries themselves. During the Reign of Terror, the guillotine became synonymous with the purge of enemies. Perceived or real revolutionary courts dispensed swift justice, often with little evidence, and the guillotine was the final stop for many. It was no longer a device of equality, but rather one of fear, designed to keep the masses in check. Those who had previously celebrated the power of the guillotine now found themselves subject to it. The blade that had been touted as a means of fairness became an agent of ruthless control over all who dared to defy the revolutionaries who wielded it. A tool of terror, the guillotine was not just a means of execution. It became an institution, a part of daily life in Paris. It was no longer just about justice, it was about power and spectacle. As the crowds gathered daily to witness executions, it became a form of entertainment, albeit a morbid one, where lives were extinguished with no more thought than the flick of a switch in an industrial factory. The revolution had transformed the guillotine from a means of execution into an unrelenting force of terror. The masses were held captive by its blade, and for some it was the most effective form of control, a way to maintain order through fear and spectacle, not just through punishment, but by showing the people exactly what would happen to those who dared to stand against the revolutionary ideals. As the guillotine fell, it was no longer just the end of life, it was the destruction of all that came before it, the fall of the monarchy, the dismantling of aristocratic privilege, and the terrifying power of the state that had risen from the revolution itself. The blade became a symbol of how easily those who had once been powerful could be brought low in the eyes of the people, and how deeply fear had been ingrained in the hearts of all who lived under its shadow. The guillotine had become more than an instrument of death. It was now a tool of intimidation and oppression. Its cold, unforgiving blade a constant reminder that no one, no matter how high their station, was safe from the power of us. The revolution's justice, the stories of those who had fallen to it, were whispered in the streets as cautionary tales to those who dared to think of challenging the new order. The Reign of Terror, the guillotine's role in mass executions. By 1793, the guillotine had evolved from a symbol of justice into an instrument of state-sanctioned terror. What began as a tool for swift execution became the cornerstone of political purges as the French Revolution spiraled into paranoia and bloodshed under Maximilien Robespierre, leader of the radical Jacobin France, plunged into the Reign of Terror, a period where suspicion alone could lead to the scaffold. The infamous law of suspects, passed in September 1793, abolished the need for concrete evidence in trials, allowing revolutionary courts to condemn perceived enemies of the Republic with alarming speed. The tribunal system, originally designed for fairness, became a conveyor belt for death, leading to an estimated 16,000 guillotine executions. No one was safe. Nobles, clergy, moderate revolutionaries, and even ordinary citizens faced the blade. Among the most shocking moments was the mass execution of the Girondins on October 1793. 21 prominent politicians, once champions of revolutionary ideals, were paraded through Paris in open carts before being systematically beheaded. Their deaths marked the triumph of extremism and demonstrated how the guillotine had become a weapon of political annihilation. But Robespierre himself was not immune to the machine he had wielded so mercilessly. As fear of his rule grew, he was arrested in July 1794. His own execution met with cheers from the very crowds that once adored him signified the end of the Reign of Terror. The guillotine, once seen as the ultimate symbol of revolutionary justice, had become a machine that devoured its own makers. The guillotine's final blow. The last execution in 1977. By the mid-20th century, the guillotine, once a symbol of revolutionary justice, had become a grim relic of the past. Yet astonishingly, it remained France's official method of execution until 1977. While public beheadings had long ceased, executions still took place behind prison walls, carried out in secrecy. The final chapter of the guillotine's blood-soaked history came with the case of Hamida Jandoubi, a Tunisian-born man convicted of murder. Jandoubi's crimes were brutal, and his trial stirred public debate over whether France should continue using the death penalty sentenced. In 1977, he was transported to Baumetz prison in Marseille in the early hours of September 10th. As the executioners prepared the device, Jandoubi was strapped to the bascule, the wooden board that positioned the condemned beneath the blade. In a matter of seconds, the guillotine delivered its final stroke, marking the end of nearly 2 centuries of state-sanctioned beheadings. in France, but the world had changed and France was at a crossroads. Calls for abolition of the death penalty had grown louder, with many arguing that capital punishment had no place in a modern democracy. In 1981, under President François Mitterrand, France officially outlawed executions, making the guillotine obsolete. What was once hailed as a tool of humane justice was now seen as a relic of a bygone era. With Jean Duby's death, the guillotine met its own execution, this time at the hands of history itself. The guillotine was more than an execution device, it was a reflection of the era that created it. Born from revolutionary ideals, it was meant to bring justice, yet it became a symbol of excess and terror. Its blade fell on kings and criminals alike, enforcing equality in death, but exposing the darker side of human nature. Governments rise and fall, but history proves that power once wielded mercilessly often turns on those who embrace it. So here's the question. Was the guillotine a necessary step toward justice, or a grim spectacle that revealed the failures of humanity? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. As Victor Hugo once wrote, "Death belongs to God alone. By what right do men touch that unknown thing?" The guillotine, once celebrated as the epitome of justice in a time of revolution, became a stark reminder of the dangers of absolute power. It was not just a machine designed for execution. It was a tool for domination that led to fear, oppression, and the downfall of those who created it. Its role in history cannot be overlooked, but neither can its dark legacy. By the time of its last use, it had become a symbol of a much deeper issue: the abuse of power and the willingness of governments to maintain control at any cost. The final blow of the guillotine was not just the end of a device, it was the end of an era of fear and violence that had consumed a nation for centuries. The world had moved on from the age of revolutionary terror, but the shadows of the guillotine lingered on in the minds of those who had witnessed its gruesome reign. So as we reflect on its history, we must ask ourselves, was it necessary for the guillotine to exist? Was it essential to enforce justice, or was it merely a reflection of human cruelty and the thirst for power that all too often defines the course of history? Let us remember the lesson that the guillotine teaches us: the cost of unchecked power and the dangerous allure of violence as a means of control. History tells us that the guillotine, once hailed as an instrument of justice, ultimately became a tool for oppression, revealing the true price of fear and revolution.